12%, manufacturing 12%, and engineering R&D 14%. One could argue, when you compare that to China, are these numbers too small? I think, based on everything we heard over the last day, yeah, it seemed like there is a lot of awareness to build among US and other companies about the opportunities in India. We look at Western European companies, again, the red bars are for China and the yellow ones for India. But China, again, is mostly at the top, but Central and Eastern Europe is a big destination for Western European companies. I think it's a little bit different maybe from the US companies, but they do, I think the notion of nearshoring for Western European manufacturers is very attractive. I think with expansion of the European Union and maybe further expansion possibilities, it just becomes a good investment opportunity for these companies. Again, India, about similar awareness of Western European manufacturers as the US one, and again, I think there is some opportunity there. So what do these challenges lead? We've tried to summarize the problems that it creates in what we call the 5 paradoxes of complexity. One, the optimization paradox. As they said about politics, I think you can say that about globalization. Companies are globalizing everything, but most optimization is local, just like politics. And that's maybe a good idea in politics, but for global companies, it's a very bad idea. We just published a study about 5 or 6 months ago about this problem, how companies are not getting the value out of globalization. They make a lot of mistakes. I'll get to some of those because they don't have the visibility into the operations. They don't make the right decisions. They don't enter new markets the right way and new products. The list goes on. They don't invest in optimization of their networks. And that does pay off, as our findings show. The customer collaboration paradox. Everybody says the customer is king. I'm sure those of you, whether it's actually in academia or in business, you probably all have a plaque on the door saying this institution or companies only exist because we have customers. And I'm sure we have one in Deloitte and Deloitte Research as well. But when you look at the data, so how much do you do with these customers? Are you collaborating with them on your strategy? Are you collaborating on quality and so forth? And at the end of the day, very, very few companies have done a lot of work in this area. And we have some cases where when you start doing that, there's just phenomenal benefits. The few companies that have done something get very large benefits, but it is really only a few companies that have done it. The innovation paradox. The product innovation is the #1 driver for growth, these companies say. But when we look at the priorities, in terms of what investments do they have to make in capabilities to bring products to market, product innovation really falls to the bottom. So they're not investing in the time to market, the supply chain capabilities, the visibility you need to make the right introductions and transitions of products in their overall operations to support new products. And maybe it's no wonder that anywhere from, let's say, 60, 80, 90% of new products fail, or maybe more. There's simply a very large disconnect between the innovation machine in the company and the commercialization machine. I think that link is crucially important. The flexibility paradox. Everybody wants to be flexible, and everybody needs to be flexible. You heard Jeff too from GM earlier here. Flexibility is a key target for large companies and for any companies for that matter. But a lot of the things that companies are doing, in fact, are in many ways reducing the ability to be flexible. So you outsource, but if you then are not able to manage that outsource relationship very well, aren't you sometimes becoming less flexible? How many companies haven't experienced suppliers that couldn't deliver the products and where perhaps they previously produced that product themselves? So yeah, there may have been some cost reduction in the outsourced relationship, but But on the other hand, they lost flexibility. They didn't always gain it. Of course, some companies have been able to manage it very well. Cisco is a good example of a company that at least claims to say that they have the capabilities to manage these relationships and invest heavily in the people managing them. I think it's a critical component of doing it. Finally, risk quality is the number one priority. And in fact, when we asked these companies, I think the 90 to 95% of companies said that they had as good or better quality than their primary competitors. And when you think about it, if we sampled just about all the various segments of an industry, whether or not they had good, excuse me, good products, then not everybody can be as good or better. Or maybe it means that that quality is not a parameter to compete on anymore. I know we have some evidence to the contrary about the value of the Deming price and certainly and the value of final quality outputs and so forth. But it is it's been around for a while and it is difficult to make money. What companies are doing though is in many ways risking even further that quality proposition to their customers. When you start outsourcing to far-flung destinations and entering new markets, introducing more and more new products in your supply chain, you have many more chances of jeopardizing quality. And I think I am not sure if companies are quite aware of what the trends that they're setting for themselves, what they mean. Why is it that companies are not doing this very well? What are the problems? So we sort of looked at 4 factors: lack of visibility into where the money is today and where it will be in the future. We look at statistics. We ask companies, how satisfied are you with your information on product profitability, unit cost, logistics cost, manufacturing cost? And you would think, well, these are sort of fundamental drivers that end up at the bottom line very fast. But very few companies are highly satisfied with this. They sort of medium or they very little satisfaction in these areas. And the problem is they can make really big mistakes. One of the cases we have up here, the US-based multinational decided to outsource their manufacturing operation, and they happened to be located in Southeast Asia. And they thought that looked good. They expected a reduction in the total cost base for the firm. But the problem is that they actually changed the network and the legal structure of that network and ended up paying duties into the European market, as an example, based on the sales price rather than on the cost base when they were part of the same company. So they actually doubled their duty payments. So because they didn't have visibility, there was no collaboration between perhaps purchasing, procurement, and maybe corporate strategy and the tax people who paid the duties, they ended up with a higher cost base. So very simple problem afterwards. It's easy to have 20/20 hindsight, but it's just a really big problem. And you just wonder how many companies ever found out that they made the wrong decision. Maybe some companies 2 years down the road saying, this business is not improving, right? But they actually had done the wrong move 2 years earlier. Rigid, inflexible supply chains. Many of the companies say that actually the biggest obstacle to supply chain flexibility is forecasting. And I'm sure the academics in the room must be laughing now. But when you think about it, if you had perfect forecast, what would you need? Supply chain flexibility. So, but given the benefit of the doubt, I think what it just shows is that demand uncertainty is a really big problem for companies. So you can build a lot of flexibility, but if you can't match it with demand, it may be the wrong flexibility you built. And it's very likely that you did, based on what we know about the visibility they have into various metrics. Insufficient collaboration. Kumar is going to talk more about that in the Indian context, but generally speaking, companies are not collaborating very well, both with their customers or with the suppliers. In fact, one of the interesting parts is that they're not doing either one very well, but they claim that they collaborate better with their suppliers than with their customers. But when you think about it, we've been surveying both customers and suppliers, and they're probably sitting at different places. So when you ask the supplier, he doesn't quite have the same impression of the collaboration as the customer has. So we've been joking a little bit of calling this collaboration. You know, I don't know if you know the term, but when you collaborate backwards to your supplier, you just tell them what to do, and you call it collaboration. They called it harassment. Immature technology implementation. By and large, companies, they may have come a long way in many industries, but still a lot of opportunity. The good companies are far ahead in that area. I won't, let me go on here. We have another case there. Is it affecting business performance? Well, based on the benchmark data, 34% of companies missed their growth goals, 31% missed their profitability goals, and for shareholder returns, 28% of companies missed their goals. That's not very good. We did another study very recently we looked at the 1,000 largest global manufacturing companies, and we looked at their cash flow return on investment. About 50% of the companies we studied failed to meet their cost of capital. So essentially they're destroying shareholder value, destroying capital every day they're in operation. So what should you do? That's the big question. But again, to keep it simple here, we looked at three things: the custom product supply chain, and what are the capabilities needed to deal with the complexity. Remember, the penalty for that complexity is very high. We saw some examples of that. But how do you actually come out of it? So one simple way of looking at it, and a 2x2, is about the maximum complexity we could deal with in the research. So I don't want to do biotech, that's for sure. About 49% of respondents, we decided on the cutoffs here, but the trend is the most important thing here. But about 50% of the respondents is the base in terms of, we looked at different metrics, but including profitability. They are not very complex, but they don't have great value chain capabilities either. 37% of companies were very complex global companies. The way we measured complexity up the y-axis is we looked at the spread of manufacturing or the various value chain functions across 13 geographies, including India as a separate geography. And the more complexity you had in that global network, the more complex you were. So they're 17% more profitable. Another group, not so complex in the sort of the global value chain complexity, but they had great capabilities. They're 19% more profitable than the base firm. Significant improvement. But what we think is the most important one, and Ajit mentioned that a little earlier today, is what the companies we call complexity masters, for lack of a better term. Only 7% of the companies, they got very, very complex global operations, but they also have built great capabilities, or at least they're better capabilities than the other companies, to manage that complexity. And clearly it shows up, 73% more profitable. We also looked at shareholder returns, asset returns and so forth. In all these areas, they perform better than all the other companies. What is it that they do very well? We do believe that they're able to synchronize this complexity in better ways through various means. So in one way, Ajit mentioned this, within each of the major areas, they've done good improvements. So in the customer functions or processes, marketing, selling, and servicing, they're better. In product innovation, design, development, and transition capabilities, they have also made significant investments, and they are better. And supply chain, plan, source, make, deliver, standard definitions, they've made more improvements than the other firms. But we also think that it's the ability to synchronize across, so linking these. So rather than just thinking about, let me make a better product development organization or supply chain organization or marketing sales organization, let me try to link them up better to make sure that it aligns. One of the companies we studied was Porsche with their product introductions. Some of you may recall when they introduced the Porsche Cayenne. Now it's, I think, about 2 years ago. Before that, when they started developing, everybody in the automotive industry said, don't do this. Don't develop a sport utility vehicle. You will ruin your brand. It's perceived as a high-end sports car. Porsche did what we think is the right thing. They actually went out and asked their customers. It was unreasonable to do that, but they thought that they may get some insights. As it turns out, most of their customers already had a high-end luxury SUV in their garage, they said, yeah, the only reason we don't have a Porsche is because you're not selling one. So Porsche decided to do it. They worked with their customers, and they also asked, what's important in my brand? And they said, well, what's important is it has the high performance, luxury, and also that it has a German heritage. So Porsche said, okay, with these constraints, now I can synchronize my value chain setup for this new model. So they could go out and share R&D with Volkswagen and save about $500 million on that. They could set up a flexible plant they knew had a good chance of meeting appropriately the demand that they knew about. And they could set up the supply chain, sourcing about 80 or 85% of the cost of the vehicle from other vendors without jeopardizing what was important to the customers. This is the shorthand of the story. We have documented much more detail, but it shows that if you look at the whole picture, you have a big opportunity. If you look at the within processes, as I mentioned, the complexity masters have done more within each of the major product, customer, and supply chain areas we talked about. But what's perhaps more important, these are just very few of the data we have. I think we published many of them, if not most. But if you look at the ones across, so using just some simple metrics here, using formal product lifecycle program methodology, design for quality, right, again, maybe